Hello everyone, Grandpa Ron here again. We're going to continue our very basic Bible study this morning with chapter 19 of Genesis. It's kind of a long one with a lot of things we need to note in there, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So let's start off with verse 1. Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. Now remember, these are the same two angels that had just visited Abraham with the Lord appearing to him and the discussion about destruction of Sodom and question of whether the Lord would destroy it with the righteous people still in the city. And of course the Lord said no. But these are the same two angels. And Lot was sitting at the gate, which was a high position back at that time. Remember, Abraham had rescued Lot and his people and belongings when Sodom had been overtaken by these different kings in earlier chapters. And so it's likely that the people in Sodom had given Lot some type of position. He was noteworthy in the town because of what his uncle Abraham had done. And so he's sitting at the gate. This is where you'd welcome people coming into the city, interact with them, if they were dignitaries, show them deference, and all that. So Lot met them. And just like Abraham in the previous chapter, we're going to see that Lot is very hospitable. Verse 2, and he said, Now behold, my lords, please turn aside into your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go on your way. They said, however, No, but we will spend the night in the square. Remember, they were there to investigate the bad things the Lord had heard about Sodom, and were going to report back to him. So they wanted to stay up in the square to check things out. Verse 3, Yet he urged them strongly. So they turned aside to him and entered his house, and he prepared a feast for them and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Again, similar to what Abraham had done, hospitality. The reason that he urged them to turn in is that very well may be that Lot knew what went on in the city in the evening and wanted to protect them. Verse 4, Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded the house, both young and old, all the people from every quarter. And they called to Lot and said to him, Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we may have relations with them. Now this is talking about sexual relations. Unlike Abraham and Lot that showed hospitality to these strangers, these people were not hospitable at all and wanted to take advantage of these men. And it's just an example of how it's hard for us to understand, but how degraded a society can become without God. And it's an indication to us that even though Lot is referred to in the New Testament as a righteous man, and he was in the sense that he believed God, feared God, but he's living for himself too, and it doesn't appear that much of an example has been set for the men in the city, other than maybe him telling them he shouldn't do this. But at any rate, the people from every quarter came in and wanted to have relations with these men. Verse 6, But Lot went out to them at the doorway and shut the door behind him and said, Please, my brothers, do not act wickedly. Not a very powerful sermon or testimony. Just calm down, guys. It seemed like kind of a meek response. And he had been living there a long time, so he may have been tainted in the sense that he was used to this kind of stuff. Verse 8, now behold, I have 2 daughters, have not had relations with man. Please let me bring them out to you, and do to them whatever you like. Only do nothing to these men, inasmuch as they have come under the shelter of my roof. Wow, this is kind of a disgusting compromise, to give up his own daughters to this mob in return for protection of these men. That's to us, that seems like a really disgusting compromise. Verse 9, but they said, stand aside. Furthermore, they said, this one came in as an alien, and already he's acting like a judge. Now we'll treat you worse than them. So they pressed hard against Lot and came near to break the door. So they resented his position in the city, I guess. He only inherited it because of what his uncle had done, and they saw him as a stranger and an alien in their midst, and they've kind of turned on him. Verse 10, but the men, that's the angels, reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. So the angels rescued him. Verse 11, and they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves trying to find the doorway. So at this time, Lot must have realized that they're angels, because they seems like miraculously blinded these townspeople. Verse 12, then the men, again the angels, said to Lot, whom else have you here? A son-in-law, and your sons and your daughters, and whomever you have in the city, bring them out of this place, for we are about to destroy this place, because their outcry has become so great before the Lord, that the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So the Lord already knew the situation there, but as we mentioned in the last chapter, he sent these angels to verify, to show us hundreds of years later that he is just and doesn't act prematurely. But now even we can see how bad things had gotten in this town. Verse 14, and Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, and said, up, get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy the city. But he appeared to his sons-in-law to be jesting. So I guess it was out of character for him to get serious and warn people. And he just seemed to be, I'm sure he was kind of panicky now, trying to obey these angels and get out. But they dismissed him. Verse 15, and when morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city. But he hesitated. So the men seized his hand and the hand of his wife and the hands of his daughters, for the compassion of the Lord was upon him, and they brought him out and put him outside the city. So even though Lot hesitated, we don't know why, but I mean, he's lived there his whole life, and he's weighing things in his mind. He hesitated, yet the Lord was gracious and had these angels basically drag him out. Verse 17, and it came about when they had brought them outside that one said, escape for your life. Do not look behind you, and do not stay anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains, lest you be swept away. Verse 18, but Lot said to them, oh no, my lords. Verse 19, now behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have magnified your loving kindness, which you have shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. In other words, I don't think I can make it to the mountains. I'm older and too slow. Verse 20, now behold, this town is near enough to flee to, and it is small. Please let me escape there. Is it not small? That my life may be saved. And he, one of the angels, said to him, behold, I grant you this request also, not to overthrow the town which you have spoken. Verse 22, hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. Therefore the name of the town was called Zoar. So God is so gracious. He's told these angels, don't destroy anything until Lot is brought to safety. And we know that Lot is referred to as a righteous man. We know he's a sinner. He's done a lot of things wrong, and he's going to do even more wrong later. But he has a heart for God. He believes in God. And because of that, and maybe in deference to Abraham, because he's Abraham's nephew, God is being very gracious here and allowing him to go to this town that's later called Zoar. Verse 23, the sun had risen over the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. Wow. Totally destroyed these two cities. Now, a lot of people say these were natural events. I remember an earlier chapter, the leaders of Sodom had tried to escape these kings that were attacking, and they went through an area that was full of tar pits. And some people say, well, the tar pits ignited, and that's what killed them, what caused all the fire. But these verses say that God rained fire from heaven. This is a godly judgment and supernatural in its manner. And so this wasn't just coincident. This was a willful act of God. Now, one thing that one could ask is, we're all sinners. We've seen Abraham sin. We've seen Lot sin. Didn't they deserve to die and deserve God's judgment just as much as these people in Sodom? Well, yes, we all deserve God's judgment, but God is very gracious. And the difference between Abraham and Lot and the people of Sodom is that the people of Sodom, God knew their hearts and minds and knew that they were not going to change. They had rejected God openly, in defiance, and maybe Lot had some witness there, and that had been rejected. So there was no longer any hope for them. They were not going to change. It's kind of like with the flood, Noah's flood. Mankind had been warned, Noah had warned them, but they had no concern for God. They had no care for God. They had dismissed God. They were living life for themselves, and that was it. So we've seen other examples of this where even whole nations, God said their sin isn't complete yet. He had given them time to repent and seek Him, but they rejected. And at some point, a man and even nations and groups reach a point where they're at the point of no return. God's will is that no one perish. Verses in the New Testament tell us that. But that all would seek Him and come to saving knowledge of the Savior. But men reject it. As long as there's a glimmer of hope in man, I think God will, this is my opinion, will let that person survive in the hopes that they will turn to God. But when they reach a point where God is totally rejected and there's no longer any hope, God could very easily take them. It's all in His choice. So that's the difference between Sodom and Gomorrah and Abraham and Lot. They're all sinners, but Lot and Abraham had a heart for God. They were in a position where they could change. God could work on them and could change, and we'll see that Abraham is going to mature in his walk with God in the future. But Sodom and Gomorrah, no. Their rejection was total and complete, so God had no choice but to destroy them. Verse 26, but his wife from behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. This wasn't just a casual glance back. She chose to look back, probably with some kind of yearning in her heart to go back. That's where her real heart was. As depraved as the city was, she was part of it, and she wanted to go back. And Jesus tells us, don't look back. Once you've accepted Him as Savior, don't look back. Don't yearn for the things of the world, but seek the things of heaven. But she didn't do that. She looked back. And she was miraculously turned to a pillar of salt. There are some people that will try to rationalize this away as well. There was a dust storm and salt covered her. No, this was a miraculous act of the Lord. Now things really get bad. Now Abraham rose early in the morning and went to the place where he had stood before the Lord, and he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley, and he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land ascended like the smoke of the furnace. Wow. You can imagine he's thinking Lot probably had been destroyed too. But hopefully he trusted God and realized the truth in what God had said. What if there's 10 righteous men in there? I won't destroy the city. Verse 29, thus it came about when God destroyed the cities of the valley that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot lived. And Lot went up from Zoar and stayed in the mountains, and his 2 daughters with him, for he was afraid to stay in Zoar, and he stayed in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. So he wound up, because of his fear, going up to the mountains anyway, even though the angels had accommodated his request just to go to Zoar. One commentator says it's possible the people in Zoar attributed the fate of Sodom and Gomorrah to Lot somehow, and that might have made him more fearful. We don't know that, but it could be. This is where it really gets depraved. And before I read the verses, remember, Lot's 2 daughters had grown up in Sodom, and we saw the total depravity in Sodom. And she had lived there, they had lived there their whole lives, and surely they were tainted by the mentality and the thoughts of the people of Sodom. And that might help explain what's going to happen in these next verses. Verse 31, then the firstborn said to the younger, our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come in to us after the manner of the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and let us lie with him, that we may preserve our family through our father. In other words, they're going to get him drunk and become pregnant from their own father through incest, and their rationale is to carry on Lot's line, his lineage. Verse 33, so they made their father drink wine at night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. So he didn't know he had had relation with his daughter. He surely knew that he was getting drunk. So it's disgusting behavior on Lot's part. Verse 34, And it came about on the morrow that the firstborn said to the younger, Behold, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. Then you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve our family through our father. So the older's encouraging the younger to do the same thing. Verse 35, So they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both the daughters of Lot were with child by their father. So their little scheming plan has worked. Verse 37, And the firstborn bore a son, and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. And as for the younger, she also bore a son, and called his name Ben-Ami. He is the father of the sons of Ammon to this day. And we're going to learn about the Moabites and Ammonites later, but it's not a good outcome. Wow. So we see God's righteous judgment poured out as a last resort on Sodom and Gomorrah. But we see that he was gracious enough to pull his believer, Lot, and his wife and daughters out. Even though they're sinners, God was crediting him with righteousness because he did believe in and attempt to rely on him. And he's being gracious to Abraham by sparing his nephew, even though Abraham too is a sinner, as we all are. And we're going to see this play out over and over again throughout the whole Bible, where we realize that all of us are only here by God's grace. I'm going to put the verses at the trailer. Romans 3:23 and 6:23 that talks about all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and the wages of sin is death. That's what we deserve. But God is gracious, and he's provided a way out for all of us, and that's through the death, burial, and resurrection of his Son, Jesus Christ. I hope this has been meaningful to you and that you get something out of this. And next time we're going to look at chapter 20 and how Abraham sins yet again. We'll talk about that next time. Anyway, God bless. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.